Not exactly something I saw, but heard and felt. My dad and I went backpacking in the Yosemite National Park in California and stopped in a valley to camp for the night. In the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of at least a dozen, what sounded like deer, sprinting right past our tent, followed by a loud thud behind our tent, and then the forest going dead silent. I've been camping my whole life, and never have I heard silence like that in a forest. Not even a leaf was blowing in the wind. Something instinctively inside me made my whole body freeze. I couldn't breathe. Goosebumps, heart racing, literally petrified. I swear on my life, I could hear whatever made that loud thud start tiptoeing around our tent. I say tiptoeing because the steps were so soft and careful. It felt intentional, like it was investigating our tent, and I could feel its presence moving around the tent. After what felt like a lifetime, but was probably only 5 to 10 minutes, a branch snapped somewhere in the forest, followed by a loud whoosh of wind, and the forest just went back to normal. I want to say it was a mountain lion, just curious about our tent or something, and that's what I told myself the rest of our trip so I could sleep that night. But the horrible pit in my stomach, and the fear that washed over me was nothing like I've ever felt before or since, and has convinced me there are things in the forest far worse than people realize. For context, I am a believer in the paranormal, and believe I have had encounters with skinwalkers or something of the sorts in the past. I am also a hunter, fisherman, and general outdoorsman. I've spent countless nights backpacking, camping, hunting, and anything of that sort, so I feel like I have a good understanding of things that go on in the woods. Also, before anyone comments, I have heard many fox, coyote, and hawk calls. I am not discounting that this may be what we were hearing, but I firmly doubt it. Anyways, let's go on to the story. This took place last night. I was camping on the north shore of Lake Superior. I was with 3 of my buddies. 3 of us were camping, and my other friend was sleeping in his truck, about 500 to 600 feet away. We came to the spot after dark, and started setting up camp. Right away, the animals were acting really weird in my opinion. The deer, which we disturbed from their bedding, were very reluctant to leave, running about 30 to 40 feet away and stopping, turning around, and just staring at us. These deer stayed for hours, and while we cooked, played music, and generally enjoyed ourselves, they would one at a time start walking towards our camp. One of these deers would get very close to our camp and seemed to be very annoyed with our presence, staring down our headlamps while walking straight at us. Usually, a deer would get the deer in a headlights effect and be stunned, but this one in specific wouldn't budge. It would walk a straight line right at us, less than 20 feet away, until we would run at it to scare it off. This happened about 5 to 6 times in the span of about an hour. Weird we all thought, as we kind of brushed it off and kept camping. Around 1 a.m., Buddy left for his truck and left the 3 of us out there. My one friend went to lay in his hammock, while me and my other buddies stayed out there to see what was going on. This is when it got really weird. All night, there were eyes surrounding our camp, staying just out of the range of our headlamps, almost 360 around us, staring into our camp. After a while, we freaked out, and I pulled the sage out of my bag and lit it, walking around the camp with it in my hand. About 5 minutes later, once the initial sage burnt out, I looked into the woods and everything was gone. Not one set of eyes were left. We enjoyed the peace and quiet for a while we stayed around the fire talking. This only lasted a little while until we started hearing whistling in the woods, around 2 a.m. now. Every couple of minutes, we would hear a long, drawn-out whistle coming from nearby. Every time it would happen, it would be from a different direction, but it still sounded like it was right next to us. We burnt more sage and tried to ignore it as it kept happening for about 45 minutes. We got really creeped out, and at this point, we started becoming a little more cautious, building the fire a little larger and grasping at our camping knives and hatchets. Once it hit 3:15, my buddy woke up from his hammock. getting up and asking us what time it was. I checked on my watch and said it was 3:15. My buddy checked his phone and confirmed 3:15. We sit up and start talking around the fire for what seems like an hour, maybe longer, maybe less. About an hour passes, and my same friend asks us to check the time. We do so, and my watch clearly says 3:05. I'm extremely confused at this point, and before telling him, I ask him to check for himself. He says 3:05 in a very confused manner. This scares the hell out of us, and we decide to start packing it up and get what sleep we can in our vehicles. We started packing up on shifts, the two of them packing up while I stand watch. After they are done packing, I start packing up my things. About 5 minutes into me packing my things, all of a sudden, we stop and hear this drawn-out, shrill screech coming from the woods right next to us. I've never heard anything like this, but it sounded like a young lady in distress. It lasted for about 10 seconds as we all sat quietly and listened. After this, we all looked at each other wide-eyed and pale-faced. Unanimously, we decide it's time to get the hell out of Dodge. Leaving our things, and we all started sprinting towards the vehicles, checking behind us as we ran. We came back for our things once daylight hit, but didn't have anything else happen. Believe me or not, it doesn't really affect my opinion on what happened. Again, I have spent countless nights in the deep woods and have never experienced anything quite like this. This happened around 2021, and sometimes I still find it hard to grasp. For context, I now live in a different place and along with most of my relatives, so I feel safer saying this on here. The reason I'm posting this is for people to learn and possibly caution themselves from my experience. I'd say the place I lived was just pretty old. It wasn't densely populated nor empty. It had wooded areas around it. You could cycle to the mall, school, and other normal places, but you'd have to take a car to go to places like the hospital. I was basically in my last year of high school. Being an only child and a girl on top of that made my parents overprotective, and I was naturally more cautious than the rest of my friend group. I really didn't mind being that way though, because I always thought it was the better option. So, teenagers from my school would have these outdoor get-togethers in the woods, a few kilometers away from the school. It was just common for people to lounge out and about, chilling till 3 a.m. or something. Including me, it was a group of 4. They decided it was the last year and we should probably drink together in the woods. Obviously, looking back, it was a stupid idea. But it wasn't unsafe, and it wasn't deep in the woods either. There's a pretty clear trail and a small open area where people would take their dogs and whatnot. We planned to do it on a Thursday night because my parents would be out, and the rest would convince their parents we're having a sleepover. We bought alcohol and some other stuff just to chill out. There was no others, and that was because it was a weekday and quite chilly as well. It was pretty lively, and you could see houses from the distance and people would be driving around, so naturally, we felt safe. We walked on the trail for about 1 minute when I felt uneasy. I felt like we were being watched or something like that, and looked over to one of my friends. She also looked a little distressed, but we just shrugged it off. We walked only a few minutes and we found our spot. We started drinking and basically spent about an hour and 30 minutes gossiping and having deep talks while being drunk. I didn't drink too much and neither did my other friend. We were just a little tipsy. We forgot about the brief, weird feeling we had felt while walking until we heard something from the thick of the trees in front of us. Even though we were loud, we all heard it. It was this weird giggle. I got up from the tree log I was sitting on and dragged my other friends back a little. We had a fire going and 2 torches, but still couldn't really see into that area. It wasn't that close to us. Think about 4 doors away if you place them horizontally, so the fact that we heard the laugh was just insane to me. I pointed the flashlight straight into the area, and no one came out. I sat back down, and when I turned the flashlight off, there was a silhouette coming out. I switched on the flashlight to blind the person, while my other friends did the same. We started yelling and getting ready to run, when I saw the most horrifying sight of my life. it was this man who we'd never seen before. He had this plaster smile, and his hair was covered in dirt. He was pale, and his eyes were almost like it wasn't looking at us, but just in our general direction. I can't explain, but it was just textbook creepy. We all ran for it. My very drunk friends even managed to snap out of it. We got to my house, as I lived closer to the place, and said that we'd call the cops. We were scared of our parents, but it didn't matter. We called the cops, and they found nothing. Word got out, and people pretty much strayed away from the paths at night. And a couple of the guys in our school managed to get their dads with all of their guns to find the guy, but nothing ever came of it. Fast forward to like a month later. We didn't talk about it much and never did anything like that again. I got a pocket knife and pepper spray to keep. I went home after school and was exhausted, so I decided to take a nap. My dad was at work and my mom was visiting her sister. I suddenly woke up to this weird sound. We had a one-story and the walls were not too thick. I locked all of the doors and even the windows out of habit, still fearing for the worst. I locked my room door and kind of looked out of my window. There was nothing. I grabbed a bat and my phone. Heading out of my room, I looked at all of the doors and everything was locked. There was this weird thing, like shuffling out of my house, and I just looked out of the window of my living room. I kid you not, it was the same dude from the woods. He was just outside, walking in this erratic, eerie way, which just sent me into a spiral. He somehow saw me and started saying, "Hi there." Very loudly, I called the police, and then I told him to F off. After that, he started saying my name and all of my friends' names. The police questioned him, and he had no history of mental illness. And after enough interrogation, he confessed to liking younger women. He is in jail now and will probably get out in a couple years. My dad has a friend who's a cop, and the cop told him the guy would scream when they asked him things. He was also guilty of attempted sexual assault and harassment, but that's all I know of. In summer 2019, my partner and I, both early 20s, decided to take a road trip to Vancouver, Canada, and then stay at Golden Ears Provincial Park. We liked camping, had spring break, and wanted to do something different and make the most of our vacation. My partner had never been out of the US, and it seemed like a crazy new experience. It was a 6-day trip with Airbnbs in each state, and the grand finale was a reserved campsite at Golden Ears, and it was close to the water, Alouette Lake. We packed terribly, had a giant tent, brought a bunch of fruit and veggies to eat healthy, stored them in a cooler that was too small, and brought a cutting board and knife to break up the snacks while driving. Canada was the best part, and Alouette Lake felt like walking in a painting. We walked barefoot on the rocks with our toes in the freezing cold lake. We hiked around, saw a beautiful waterfall where we saw a couple taking pics of each other for an hour. And we started modeling the same poses from far away. Everything was perfect, and the campsite was empty except for the other couple. We went to bed early that night. It was quiet, and I woke up to crackling outside of the tent. My partner was still asleep and snoring. I didn't think much of it because it was pitch black and probably an animal. The crackling continued, getting closer to the tent. I sat up and grabbed my phone. The brightness came on and I turned it off, almost blinding myself with light. In those 2 seconds, I could make out a person right outside of our tent. I froze and sat up. They weren't moving and were close enough to unzip the tent. I started poking my partner because I had no idea what to do. They woke up and I said there was someone outside of the tent. Then I hear footsteps, quiet footsteps, walking out of our campsite. My partner starts loudly saying, "What?" repeatedly in a sleepy haze. A car or truck is parked right outside of our camping area. No one is near our campsite. It starts up and then drives off. They didn't turn their lights on until they turned the corner and when we were out of view. So I couldn't make out much, but it looked like a truck. Now I'm shaking, and my partner can't put together what's happening. I want to leave, but Golden Ears locks the gates until 6 or 7 a.m., and it's 1 a.m., so we're going to be here till then. I made us move to the Ford Fiesta and sleep in the tightly packed car. She falls asleep immediately and thinks I'm paranoid. Could it have been a park ranger? It seemed too weird of behavior for a park ranger. I sit there wide awake for about 2 hours. The car is locked and I want to sleep, but I can't. I'm in the passenger seat. My partner's in the driver's seat, and now it's 3 a.m. I'm sitting half awake. I hear a car slowly drive up the road, lights off, and it rounds the corner. It had to be the same truck, and I was scared, but my adrenaline was pumping. It slowly rounds the corner and pulls up directly in front of our campsite. Again, in the same spot. I feel like I'm gonna throw up. I had no weapon but the kitchen knife we brought for fruits and veggies. So I grabbed the knife and tried to make myself look angry, crazy, and big. I sit straight up in the passenger seat, holding the kitchen knife. I kept it straight up at eye level and stared deadpan out at this truck in the pitch black. The truck stops and turns off. A light shines directly into my face coming from the inside of the truck, and I stare back, terrified, in my bright red Ford Fiesta, holding my large kitchen knife, not blinking. The truck starts up and turns on its lights, and they stay on, blinding me, and then the truck pulled out and turns around and goes back from where it came. My heart is pounding, and I wake up my partner and say we need to get the hell out of here. We pack up by just throwing things into the car, and we sit there awake until 6 a.m. We drive straight home and don't stop. We keep rehashing and trying to make sense of the situation. We ultimately decide that we both need some sleep.